Welcome to This is Yoga Therapy. I'm your host, Michele Lawrence. Join me as we venture beyond the mat into the fascinating intersections of yoga and health. Each episode brings you candid conversations with the visionary leaders and practitioners who are truly shaping this field, sharing their stories, insights, and the profound impact of yoga therapy in action. Hey, it's Michele. Before we get into today's episode, I just wanted to bring up one thing. If you're enjoying This is Yoga Therapy, the best way to support the show is to like, subscribe, and review. Whether you're watching it on YouTube or listening on your commute, your engagement really helps us scale. So please take 10 seconds to hit that subscribe button or leave a review. It really makes a world of difference. Okay, let's get into today's episode. Well, welcome back, folks, to This is Yoga Therapy. And today is a very special episode as we explore the work of our guest and the evolution of a legacy. And my guest today is Lizzie Lasater. Lizzie's a restorative yoga teacher, an architect by training, and a vital voice in the modern yoga landscape. And she's also the daughter of Judith Hansen Lasater, who's a true pioneer in our field and someone I've had the honor of hosting here on the podcast before. And as Judith prepares to either retire or scale back from teaching this year at age 80, it feels like a really good moment to acknowledge the seeds she's planted in her daughter, obviously, and in so many yoga teachers out there. But I'd love to see how that work is really blooming now through Lizzie's unique lens. And it's such a joy to meet you and have you here today, Lizzie, and take a bow to that legacy and talk about your work and where we go from here.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you, Michele, for inviting me. And thank you, dear listener, for listening to this conversation. Legacy is such a big word, and they are huge shoes to fill. That's not even how I think about it, really, as filling those shoes. I feel so lucky to be student number one. I often joke that I've been practicing yoga since the womb.
Yeah.
Because my mom has been practicing since the 70s, and she studied personally with BKS Iyengar. So it's really a lineage is the word that I think about. I was born into this practice, into this family. I got to learn up close what it means, first of all, to be a student of yoga. And Mama always says she's a student of yoga who teaches.
Yeah.
I think that modeling has been so powerful. The way she gets up in the morning and does her practice without a lot of fuss or ceremony or resistance. And the way yoga is not just a part of her physical practice, but it's completely bleeds into the way that she lives her life off the mat. So yeah, she has been talking about for years that she's going to retire. She's threatening to retire, and it is slowly happening. She just turned 79, and she sees in herself signs of aging, which are normal and beautiful, and she wants to give herself grace. I want to give herself grace and support her in slowly stepping back. Number one, with the traveling, and also with holding so much complexity, which is where I see she is not as eager to do as she used to.
Sure.
So we're doing smaller projects or projects where her role is more as our wise elder. We have a Somatic woman course coming up on May 20th, and it's all about celebrating menopause. The tagline of that course is "Menopause is not a mistake." And what I see mom's role in that is she is this light ahead of us on the path. And so she teaches in that course guided shavasanas and holds that wisdom piece for us, that how our practice can evolve over the years, become more therapeutic, become more supported. And I feel so humble to be a part of this journey with her.
I bet. That's beautiful. Thank you. Can you share more or say more just through witnessing her and her practice and her teaching, and then, of course, as your mom, but as a human being too, really. What are some of the lessons you've learned about the longevity of a teacher? Because I think that we all can benefit from hearing this.
Well, one thing I sometimes say to her when we do these big live cohorts, and we'll be on with 100 or 200 students, and we'll take questions on Zoom. And sometimes afterward, I'll be like, Mom, that answer was amazing. Like the
Mm.
woman who talked about what was going on in her hip, like, how did you know that it was her left sacroiliac joint? Like, how did you? And she just kind of laughs and says, "Because I've seen it before. Like, I've seen it." And so that's what she helps me remember, is that it is an accretive and additive process of becoming a great teacher. It's
Mm.
unfortunately not something that happens after a 200-hour training, and then we
No.
it's like, I see that it really is the layering of just
Mm.
decades of working with students and of her, enormous interest in the body, studying physical therapy, studying Sanskrit, studying yoga philosophy. She's just endlessly curious and drawn to this work, wants to learn everything she can, is still learning. Like, she, at 79, takes piano lessons. Someone comes
Wow.
to her house and teaches her piano. And so after dinner, she practices her piano, which is completely inspiring. And she is going this year again to Spain with her partner, and they are going to stay at an Airbnb for 3 weeks and take Spanish classes. And
Wow.
it's like, I keep calling it the oldies study abroad semester.
It's great.
It's inspiring, right? She's not shutting down, and I think
Mm.
she brings that curiosity. That's what she teaches and talks expressly about and encourages us. We have a monthly call called office hours, which
I've
is
been on
mentor.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh. And so
Mhm.
this monthly mentorship for yoga teachers, like, she talks about, she thinks many of us are not curious enough in our own home practice. Like, she says, I don't think you're experimenting. I don't think you're getting on the mat and trying things out,
Yeah.
uh, because that's where she gets a lot of her best insights, she
I
says.
uh-huh, you gotta do it, right? You can't just lay on the couch and read the books or look at the yoga journal. Yeah, and you gotta teach. Like, yeah, practice comes first for the practitioner, their own personal practice, and we'll finish with that question, but also you have to teach in order to hone that teaching skill. Well, let's talk a little bit about you next. And so, your background's in architecture. I didn't realize that until I was preparing for this conversation. And in yoga therapy, we often talk about structural integrity, not just the bones, but in the practice itself, right? It's this building process and looking at it holistically and all the factors that could contribute. I'm curious how your eye for design influences how you build a restorative practice. How does that feed in, if
Yeah,
it
I mean,
does?
I think everything feeds in. I studied art history undergrad, and then I studied architecture. I did a master's in architecture. And what I was so attracted to was the design process. I wanted to figure out how to go from 0 to 1. And the art history education had honed my aesthetic perspective, I would say. My intuitive, in German, the word is Bauchgefühl, my stomach feeling, like my belly brain about what it is that I like and don't like. But in architecture, it is a painful process. Learning how to design is, for me, was a painful process of moving from 0 to 1. And I sometimes call my work at Lasater Yoga, our learning platform, I see my work as a course architect. So I'm applying a lot of the same skills and intuitions in going from 0 to 1. So I mentioned our Somatic Woman course. We wrote that course in 2023-24. So with Mama Judith Hanson Lassiter and our collaborator Mary Richards, who is our resident anatomy nerd, the three of us over a bunch of meetings start with the idea. okay, we want to do a menopause yoga course. Go. Like, and how do you go from that blank page to literally a 30-page outline that we have now for this course? How do you build that? How do you refine it? And a word that I use and love, especially I have a program called Start Before You're Ready, where I mentor yoga teachers and wellness professionals about visibility
Mm.
and finding their voice and putting themselves out there into the scary internet. And I talk a lot about iteration, and that is a word I learned in architecture school. And iteration means doing something over and over and over. But instead, and it's exactly, Michelle, as you were pointing out with teaching, it's not just doing something in repetition over and over and over. The important part about iteration is you do it and then you look at it, think about it, maybe talk about it, maybe show it to someone, a mentor, a professor, another student, and then you make it again. And then you
Mhm.
make it again and again and again. And this process of reflecting on what you've made and then making it again, I think is a fundamental philosophy and skill that I learned in design school that I apply to creating online course experiences and also in how I teach, how I even think about like, okay, you have to write a description for a retreat, my Italy retreat next summer. Like, what did I teach last year? What did I like about it? What do I
Yeah.
want to change? What worked? Right?
Yeah, so helpful. So helpful to well, to look at those things from other professions. We probably most yoga teachers have had another profession, right? And I like to say that those things can inform our yoga teaching, and yoga teaching and practice can make us better at all those other professions that we might also still do, right? It works that way.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about restorative yoga and why it's so needed now. I would say, of course, we all know this, that we're overstimulated, there's constant noise, there's so much to filter through. And you've said that restorative yoga is more than just relaxation, it's a form of civil disobedience. So, why is this the case? And why is it really such important medicine that we need right now?
I love this question. What's your experience, Michelle, with restorative yoga? How much contact have you had?
Lots through the last 20, 25 years. I teach a weekly restorative class for cancer survivors, and I have just benefited from the practice itself. And it is not the only thing, only style of asana I practice either. But I've had quite a bit of experience with it.
Okay, fabulous. So I will give the definition for our listener who potentially has had less
Yeah.
experience with restorative yoga. The way we define restorative yoga is the use of props to support the body in positions of comfort and ease to facilitate relaxation and health. So, what that looks like from the outside, the way we teach it, is putting our bodies into positions that are extremely comfortable, physically comfortable, in order to manipulate the nervous system to shift from sympathetic to parasympathetic dominance, where all of the good stuff happens: immunity, fertility, all of the stuff in the blood, the central nervous system, hormone health, etc., is all happening when the parasympathetic system, growth, repair, is dominant. So, how do I think this relates to our larger lives? Well, I know that our current form of capitalism, this kind of consumption capitalism that is selling our attention, wants us to be plugged in and either consuming or producing at all times. When I step back from that and choose instead to disconnect from the internet, to disconnect from all forms of productivity, to disconnect from consuming and producing, which are all prerequisites of lying down in a comfortable position and closing your eyes for 20 minutes in a restorative pose, I think that that's a radical act in our current culture. And the default, which I honor and respect, and or I don't even know if default sounds pejorative. I don't mean it that way, but one pattern is to march in the streets and to make noise in resistance. There is a different path, which is to pursue our own silence, which I believe will radiate out when we shift our nervous systems and our internal state. That affects everyone that we touch in our lives, in our communities, and in the larger world, is the
Yeah.
dream.
It's like peace begins with me. Thank you for saying that so well. Let's also talk about really kind of the merging of the legacy that you're carrying forward with your mom and also how you're evolving it. But then I'd like to know really about how your practice and your own teaching have changed and evolved over different seasons of your life. So, the practice when you were 30 years old, how does that look? Different from the practice your mother taught when she was 30 versus where you teach now from?
So, the first thing I'll say is that mama has always been so generous in encouraging me to evolve. And her primary thing is, I just want you to understand what I'm teaching, but I want you to teach what's true for you.
Mhm.
So that has kind of been the background and prerequisite for decades now. The other thing that I will say about evolution, I was just talking to her last night. We were talking about practice evolving and what her practice we were really talking about how mama was saying at 79 her practice these days, her home practice is about 40 minutes. It's a lot supported, it's very therapeutic. It's like doing the things she knows are going to make her physical body feel good that day. So if she's got a shoulder thing going on, or kind of like the routine that she knows, okay, my sacrum is a little bit out, I got to do this and this, the movements for that. And then she likes to stand on her head to kind of prove to herself that she still got it. But I think the way I understand and the way I see when we're together, the way her practice is very different than the way my practice looks these days. I am raising two wild 6.5-year-old boys. I'm running a business. I have a house. I have a partner. I'm in this phase of aging elders, is what I call it. So it's like, it's not just my parents, but it's like my partner's parents and my partner's siblings, spouse's parents. And like, it's all around my brother's partner's parents. Like, it's like diseases and hospitalizations and surgeries and declines and diagnoses. And so I am very much in that middle phase. I'm 43, where it's like I'm still caring for my children on a visceral level, feeding them and sometimes cleaning them and cleaning the house when they track mud, as my kid did today, all the way from the terrace, just like carrying some kind of muddy bowl and spilling all the way into the kitchen. Um, Right, so I'm that, and then I'm also, you know, um, holding hands of friends and family members who are losing and watching the decline, as am I, of our elders. So, what my home practice is right now is actually quite fierce. I'm doing a lot of strength training. I'm in perimenopause, like, I'm feeling it, and so when I go to the mat, a lot of days, I need to go into a tunnel of breath and focus where there's no other input or distractions. And interestingly, what I'm really called to is like a lot of challenging strength work and a lot of restorative. And they
Yeah.
both are tunnels. They're different, it's like, but I
Mhm.
need this experience. I do a seated meditation practice in the first thing. And then often I do what we call somatic strength, which Mary Richards, our anatomy expert, has developed. She was an NCAA athlete and has always lifted weights. And she's also an amazing yoga teacher. She's developed this methodology of using resistance bands and body weight. it's very from the mat, and so therefore very yogi friendly, and she uses, like, the breath instead of counting, but I'm super drawn to that. I wanna break a sweat, but the thing is, and to answer the last part of your question about how what I think my mom's practice looked like at 30 versus mine, or, hers at 43 versus mine, I do think there has been a shift, a very welcome shift in at least the yoga bubble I find myself in,
Mm-hmm.
that there's an encouragement to bring other modalities onto the mat and into the practice and consider it real yoga,
Yeah.
and a questioning of some of the strictness of the inherited forms. It's a
Mm-hmm.
huge question that underlines our Somatic Woman program is like, okay, you find yourself in perimenopause, menopause, or beyond. Was this physical practice that you inherited, maybe it was a vinyasa flow or basically Krishnamacharya lineage practice, is that the best thing to serve your body right now, to serve your longevity? My answer right now is no. So I'm letting go or modifying many, we teach from the female pelvis at Lasater yoga very often. So we talk about, like, in case you have a female pelvis in triangle pose, you don't need to be heel to middle arch or heel to heel. You might want to give yourself a little more space, or especially in poses like Vira 1, Virabhadrasana 1, maybe you don't need to be on a tightrope. Maybe you need to make space in case you brought a female pelvis to the mat today. So that's what I'm doing, is giving myself permission. And the question I ask, with all love and respect to the lineage and where these practices came from, but I wonder if these physical practices that were designed, we know, to suppress male sexual energy, that were taught in my lineage, if we look specifically at BKS Iyengar, to my mother, for example, taught by a Brahmin man who had domestic help, who had a wife and a team of domestic help. We can just say that's a fact. And now I am, as we talked about, this woman being stretched on both sides, who doesn't have domestic help, who's cooking and tidying. I have some help with cleaning, but I don't have a staff. And I'm running a business and I'm serving thousands of yogis around the world. So, like, the question I allow myself the audacity to ask is like, what, how can this practice serve me and meet my life right now? Because I don't think that there were a lot of people in my lineage back through the history of yoga who lived the life that I'm living now, in the body, the female body that I'm living in now, having had, for example, a cesarean birth of my twins. Right. So maybe I need to make some, maybe I not even just need to, but maybe it's okay for me to make some different shapes.
Yeah. It's such an important mention, right? That things have changed and now we do feel like there's permission to support ourselves and what our unique needs are. And I think yoga therapy is very much in that vein, right? We are not focused on perfection of shape and it needs to look this way, and so that has been such a shift and a welcomed one. And I would also say, I'm curious if you'd agree, there's also now more science available about the importance of strength for women in menopause and all the other things, and how the strength in the legs helps your brain and your memory and cognition as you age. So we have these practices that we can maybe feel like we're allowed to now embrace for ourselves. And we also know how important it is because of science to bring weights into the yoga practice if you want, or bring in things from other disciplines, like you mentioned, so that we can use the body to keep the brain healthy.
Oh, I love that emphasis. And I think, something mama likes to say sometimes is your yoga is too small.
Mm.
And so I think sometimes we get too myopic in our thinking about, like, if it's not exactly this shape with this. I mean, I've literally at dinner parties with yoga friends had arguments about what the back foot is supposed to be doing in triangle pose, like we're really, or what, like whether the back pelvis is allowed to come with us or we want to be between two panes of glass. Bring it with you, by the way, if you want a happy sacroiliac joint. So I love that framing about I'm interested in a happy brain longevity. And I think we're too narrowly focused on the physical practices
Yeah.
because the key insights of yoga for me go much deeper, right? It's like it's the pranayama, it's linking breath and movement. It's the exploration of the inner states. It's the
Mhm.
yamas and the niyamas. It's
Mhm.
Tadadrushtahu's Farupe Vashtanam. Like there are these key philosophical and I would say sort of techniques embedded in yoga that are so powerful. And if, as I consider, if my entire attention is absorbed on my breath and I'm doing really great form lunges as I did this morning, like stepping back and doing a lunge and then stepping forward and doing a bunny hop, holding a couple weights because osteoporosis prevention and all the things you just said, building muscles in the lower body. If I'm doing those slowly with awareness, rhythmically with my breath, like, why isn't that yoga?
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. It is to me. Feels like it anyway, right?
And I love this definition that yoga is a state
Yeah.
and the practices associated with that state. So
Yeah.
I think we can get too rigid about the practices.
Right.
And
Right.
especially as we've been talking about, life changes, and it's not just, I frame it around the female experience because that's the experience I'm having this lifetime. But with the decline of estrogen, it's like for a lot of females' shoulders in midlife, chaturanga is probably not the best strength tool for us to be focused on.
Mm.
Whereas I practiced Ashtanga intensely for years in my 20s, I was fine.
Mm.
But now, aside from yoga, I've got a little click in my right shoulder, and I just don't want to risk it. For
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
To make I often say, like, who are we trying what yoga police are we trying to please?
So true. Yeah. So I loved that little conversation we just had there. And I'd like to go back to something you said earlier when we were talking about really restorative yoga as civil disobedience, if you will. Peace begins with me. Kind of dip back into that, but in a different way, because restorative yoga does often feel like such a silent practice. And you mentioned that, there's the silent practice, yet it speaks so loudly to the wisdom body. And so I
Mm.
wonder how you teach students to listen to their own inner guide where there's no movement to distract them, or maybe it's hard to be there, right? It's hard to be there when you just have to be with yourself.
Well, mama and I have actually just completed yesterday. We submitted our manuscript with the final copy edits to her publisher, an entire book about Shavasana.
Mm.
So I am obsessed at the moment. We've been writing it for a little bit over a year. I'm very steeped in this conversation. For me, silence is like a nutrient that is deficient in our diets. And I know I live in Austria, so there's a lot of talk about vitamin D in the winter, and we got to take the vitamin D drops and give them to our kids. And how's your vitamin D? And are you low? And are you depressed? And I think silence is a similarly underlooked, under practiced, under experienced nutrient for us because it's so easy to go through a day, a week, a month, a life now without any interstitial space of silence. We don't even have to have silence when we're walking, when we're at the grocery store, when we're in our kitchens, when we're
Sleeping.
sleeping. We
Yeah.
can just listen to all our podcasts while we sleep.
Or your noise machine, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And I remember my partner and I used to have these conversations when our twins were little, like, 1 year old. And I was a big fan of this music playlist. Like, I had this kind of 45-minute playlist that I was trying to like program them. My dream was like, if we turn on this playlist at bath time, like, then they'll just understand that it's time to be quiet and go to bed. And I finally realized it was actually for me. Like, of course, because I picked it was like these songs that I felt were super soothing.
Mm.
But he felt really strongly and won me over to the idea of like, but when they actually get in bed and we say goodnight and we close the door, he didn't want our habit to be playing music. And what we observed with friends and family at that time who had young children is that what I interpreted, there was sometimes this kind of aggressive desire, understandably, to get the kid to fall asleep, and they would use white noise machines or songs as a kind of like, "Ugh," like, forced on the child, or the children, and I didn't wanna do that. I wanted to trust that silence has always been part of the normal human experience, and that the way it connects to restorative yoga, and when I teach restorative yoga, and when we do our annual restorative yoga teacher training online at lasater.yoga, we talk about how the only people that are bored here in the room are usually the teachers. Like the teacher, the restorative yoga teacher, your students aren't bored, you're bored. And we put such an emphasis on physical comfort. That's why we need all the props. If your student's physical body is extremely comfortable and you framed it by explaining to them why it's going to be silent, that there's going to be silent, that you're holding the space, that they're safe, when you've created the conditions for physical relaxation, the physical body takes over. It's so desperate to shift from sympathetic to parasympathetic. Your body leads you down into that juicy experience. And the silence I experience when I practice it becomes like a relief. Like, thank God there's nothing here. And it's also incredibly powerful if a student says, or if I say, like, oh, I feel agitated in that silence, or I'm having such and such thoughts. It's not that the pose is creating the agitation or those thoughts. The pose and removing all of the other stimulation is revealing what's already there. I always say your yoga mat is an island. There's nothing there you didn't bring with you. And so even when we have a negative quote unquote experience in a pose like Shavasana, which we teach for 20 minutes, so it's a little bit of yoga blah blah at the beginning to set the scene. And then I usually give my students like 16, 17, 18 full minutes of silence. And then I ring the bells and bring them out. So even if we have a quote unquote negative experience in the sense of I lie there feeling an emotion that I don't want to feel, or watching my spinning mind spin, it is still a victory in disidentification that I am able to notice and observe and maybe even talk about or mention if I'm at a retreat, like later at lunch, what I would like, the fact that I see the mind and I have a separation in a space, a slight space between me and my mind, that's a positive experience. So your yoga is too small. My bubble is bigger. That even if I'm there experiencing a sense of grief or sadness or resentment or anger or all of the other human emotions that bubble up, there's this great meditation teacher, Lauren Roche, and he says that meditation is a great time to experience feelings that you didn't have time to feel in this day, this week, or this lifetime.
Mm, it's
And
true.
I love that. And I think
Yeah.
restorative yoga, we sometimes talk about as bodyfulness, in parallel with mindfulness. It's a way we access the meditative state, which can be measured with brain waves and blood chemistry. It's a way we access these deeper states that the yogis were researching, but we access it through the body rather than through the mind.
Mm-hmm. What a beautiful answer. Anything else you want to share with our listeners about what you're up to, you on your own, you with your mom, we'll add all the links in the show notes, of course, and then perhaps even just some inspiration for our listeners to stay steady in their practice and why that's so important in these times.
Well, you can find everything I'm doing at lizzie.yoga, Lizzie.yoga. If you go to that website, it's a shortcut. It goes to my website, and you can find me on Instagram and on YouTube, where we give away a bunch of free practices. But the best place is to join my newsletter, which you can find there at lizzie.yoga. I send every Sunday a short, honest email about it often begins with an experience I have had that week in my life trying to practice more restorative yoga than scroll on the internet. As a mom in the thick of things. And I share lots of free content there. And I also hope that that newsletter is an encouraging place to remind you that a little yoga goes a long way, number one. And number two, that restorative yoga counts as yoga.
Mm. Mhm.
So that's what mom does, is that she practices 7 days a week, but on Sunday, her whole practice is restorative.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that is very encouraging to me. I don't practice every single day of the week. When we go skiing, for example, and I wake up and I'm getting my kids fed and dressed and out the door, and all the equipment into the car to go skiing. Like, no, I'll do a 10-minute meditation, and then I make my coffee and I get on with things, because I know I'm going to be in my body all day physically on the mountain, that type of thing. Like, this is what I'll say, which I hope is encouraging. I am opening myself to be inviting myself to be less rigid with my practice. And instead asking myself, what does my yoga look like today? And I want to just encourage our listener, if you teach or if you practice, not to lose hope or to think that it doesn't matter, because we know scientifically that if you shift your internal energy state, which is what we're doing with these practices, if you shift your state, that will affect the people you come into contact with. And if you can give yourself the gift, we often think it's selfish to invest in our own practice, time, energy, and money, or to, I take a yoga class every Wednesday, and I have that conversation in my mind, like, oh, I don't know if I have time to, this saves me 2 hours to go to this class. And like, I should just do my emails, because it's like Wednesday morning and the kids are at kindergarten. So like, I should really be like productive. I have so much stuff to do. But when it when I do give myself 2 hours to completely disconnect and dive into the one-pointed focus of a practice and relax into the gift of someone else teaching me and saying what to do and not thinking about what sequence to teach, it is so nourishing, and it is so, I think, valuable literally for the people in my life, beyond all the benefits that I experience.
So true. Thank you so much for sharing that and everything else here today. It's been such a delightful conversation. I'm so glad to have met you, and I look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you, Michelle. I have a final question for you.
Uh,
I'd love to hear, just open-ended, off the cuff, what are you seeing in yoga therapy, in the trends and the evolution of yoga therapy? Tell me one thing you like that is happening and one thing that you don't like?
Mm-hmm. Well, I will say that one thing that I like trend wise is that yoga therapy is becoming more adopted as an adjunct, as a integrative healthcare practice, right? In places where there is recognition, and I think these places and spaces are increasing recognition that health is whole person health, right? And yoga is whole person health. So it is such a nice fit. And so I am seeing that adoption, and it makes sense, and it's encouraging, and it feels like a trend. I see
What's
that.
your pet peeve? Tell me your pet
Yeah.
peeve.
I guess my pet peeve is that by and large, and I'm speaking as a person who lives here in the US, by and large, yoga is still equated with fitness, asana. And so, whilst there has been expansion in understanding yoga as a therapeutic model, unfortunately, there's still a main disconnect around what yoga really is in order because of this legacy and focus around fitness and physicality that I feel like sometimes we still have a long way to go.
Oh, absolutely. And I know as a yoga teacher, when I tell someone that I teach yoga, what I notice so often is that their eyes then break eye contact and look down at my body.
Mm,
And what I interpret or have for years interpreted is exactly what you're saying. That
mhm.
when we say the word yoga, the thought bubble most people are having is fitness, exercise, the physical body, having a yoga body, being slim, all of these things which are sort of irrelevant to so many of them. And I often find myself in non-yoga contexts. My husband is an architect and will be somewhere, some one of his events, and then I'm suddenly being like, yeah, but I mostly teach like restorative yoga, which is like lying down and we're not really doing anything. It's not like it's not what you're thinking. It's not what you're thinking.
Yeah. Sure. Sometimes I tell people like if they ask what I do, a stranger, I'll say like I'm an entrepreneur or I'm a small business owner. I never even bring the yoga in
Totally.
initially. Of course they want to know more, like what kind of business, what kind of entrepreneur. And so we get there very quickly, but I find if I start with like I'm a yoga teacher or a yoga therapist that it makes the conversation small.
Oh, that's such a good way of putting it. It makes the conversation small. It makes the kind of tree branching diagram of the next thing they're gonna say very small. It's
Yeah.
only gonna be like, "Oh, my friend does yoga with so and so on
Yeah,
YouTube,"
yeah.
or "Where can I take a class from you?"
Yes.
Or
Yeah. Oh, I'd
"I
like to
tried
go to your
yoga, but
class. Yeah.
I tried yoga, but I didn't like it."
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like,
Uh-huh. Yeah. So, and I test these things out all the time, right? How I want to put myself out there. But yeah, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm a podcaster, which I think is just so funny. I actually never lead with that.
I love that. I sometimes say I'm building an
Yeah.
online community, and then I often really talk about we're the online community that's empowering yogis to
Mm-hmm.
practice from their own embodied experience and
Yeah.
not inherited rules. And then suddenly that's like so much that they're like,
Yeah. Whoa. Yeah. Uh-huh. They're not thinking about the yoga mat anymore.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly.
Well, thank you so much. I look forward to staying in touch. Really enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you, Michelle. What a pleasure.
Thanks again for listening. If you're interested to learn more about who we are and what we do, check us out at innerpeaceyogatherapy.com.